Yeah. So talk about being attached to dogma and being afraid to
The
step
dog
away.
barks.
I know. Let me shut the door real quick.
Okay.
All right.
I love that you're talking about dogma and the dog starts barking. Is there
Yeah.
anything more perfect?
Right. Yeah. So in a very real way, and we didn't really discuss this in much detail, but I owe the life that I have now to a Tibetan Lama.
Hmm. He was an awesome person, by the way.
Yeah. And you have many experiences with him being his driver and having him at your house and being around him, and you know what a loving, talk about modeling compassion and generosity and loving kindness and all that. That's our Lama, right?
Hmm.
um
And I
so
love that the two-word thing that sums him up is mother being.
mother being, yeah.
Like he constantly is speaking about the mother being, which we should do a whole one of these just for
Yeah.
him.
So he's saying that a daily meditation is see everyone as a mother or your mother. And that's weird in the Western world. Sometimes we have rocky relationships with our moms, right? But it's the essence of gratitude to somebody that gave you life. And so treat everybody as if they gave you life and nurtured you through when you're sick and you need somebody and you're homesick. That's the person that you want to be with. And that's each person you see throughout your day.
Mhm.
And that's all he ever teaches. And that's all he ever talks about. And I asked him one time when he was going to talk about something else. And he said, when y'all get it,
Yeah.
when y'all get it. So what happened was during this early sobriety, I was asked to go to the airport with somebody that I met at the Shambhala Center. And lo and behold, the person that got off the plane was a Tibetan Lama. And he had some teachings in town. And I was just blown away. You know, I looked like some guy just jumped out of one of these Buddhist books that I was reading. You know, I couldn't believe I was sitting there talking to a Tibetan Lama, some kid from Floresville, Texas, right? And then a couple of days before he was going to leave town, as a surprise to me and the person that he was staying with, he said he was going to come stay at my house. And I was living in a ratty, just sobering up, just getting my life together kind of apartment. And he came and stayed at my house for a few days, and a lot of my baggage was dropped at that time through that experience with him. And that's when I asked him to be my Lama. And of course, he said yes. And not only did he say yes, but he said in every lifetime
Mm.
we've been together, which kind of blew me away. And so I've kind of been struggling with representing Buddhism and representing my Lama, who I love so much, and representing myself and my own interests and the Course of Miracles and life after death and aliens and angels and all these other things that I'm into, right? And so I think that's why I really wanted Woke House to be about conversation. I personally will only bring up kind of Buddhist themes, but people can talk about whatever they want to, right? And so while Woke House is not at all dogmatic, okay, the dogs didn't bark. I thought they were going to go off on cue. Woke House is not dogmatic. I still have to keep it centered around this Buddhist theme,
Mm-hmm.
because whether I feel comfortable or not, I feel like at some level I am representing Buddhism and my Lama, right?
Yeah.
And I don't want to mess that up. So
Yeah.
when I talk about this circle of love thing, I don't know if it can be combined with Woke House or if it's going to be something totally different or what it looks like.
Yeah. And then see, like from my perspective, when we were talking about this earlier today, it was the idea that all of those things fall under the same umbrella. They just use different language. They just use different metaphor, analogy. They have cultural stories, but the experiences behind all of these things are very similar. And I think connection to the divine, to the creator, to the, and we talk about a duality of this world, but it's a constant motion thing. So it's on a spectrum. It's a 360-degree experience that we have with the light and the dark, and turning to realize that in the illusion. And even when you add the concept of, I love science, but I also think that science can be very dogmatic, and it is a religion unto itself because it created its own language to explain things the way it wanted to. And when you look beyond like that and push the limits of it, which they do in physics and then quantum physics, you're circling right back around to metaphysics and this spiritual woo-woo experiences that, and depending on whose micro dictionary you're using or whose company you're in, whether you're a wise man or a fool.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think it falls under the same. I love the idea of the all-encompassing circle of love. And I think that everything falls within that. So I think it's a beautiful concept. And I'm really excited that we get to talk about it as you're opening, like the process of it never ends. The journey never ends. So the process of understanding, oh, this door is also opening.
Mm-hmm.
What comes in? How does it come in? How do we fit these things that are all of who we are through this new door or this new idea that happens to be over 6 years old?
Yeah.
At least 6 years old, right? So
Yeah. So it's kind of weird, and a lot of times I have to do a reality check with somebody and find out if it's just in my own mind or if it really exists in the world. But my present understanding of like representing my Lama and Buddhism is that I'm already kind of pushing the envelope a little bit with Woke House. And if I bring in stuff like A Course in Miracles or some other things, that's really, really pushing it. It would almost be like going into a Christian church and talking about Buddhism or even A Course in Miracles in a fundamentalist church.
that, I mean, but that's the point. When you sent me that book on Buddhism, and I don't remember which one it was, but I had the same thing. I thought, I'm going to read this because my cousin Kylie sent it to me, and
Mm-hmm.
I read it all in one sitting. And I think I called you like 3 o'clock in the morning because I was just, what in the world did I just read? And I was like, when did this happen? Because it was so thematic of love towards the life of Jesus in the New Testament. And I'm not going into the letters to the church and the rules and all that kind of stuff. I'm talking about the life of Jesus and his message of love. And you said that happened like 500 years before the story of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And then to further like study religion, and I got my daughter actually ended up studying religion in college, so I even studied vicariously through her to find out that there's a theory that when Jesus, Mary, and Joseph fled Egypt when they were killing all the little baby boys, that they fled with the gifts of the wise men, which I always want to know, who were those wise men and where did they come from? But they
Mm-hmm.
fled to India. And so that Jesus would have grown up, until, he's 12, he shows up again in the temple with this concept of the love that Buddha was speaking of. And so it's just interesting. And then to know that there is a gospel according to Thomas that there's an Episcopal church that was in Kaufman that had their priest. I think Episcopalians have priests. I'm not sure if I get this wrong. I apologize. But he was from India, and he spoke to that. And in India, there was a strong Christian, Hindu, and Buddhism tradition that they all three worked together and got along.
Mm-hmm.
And then when my daughter was in Istanbul, to seeing that with Judaism, um,
Islam.
Islam, and Orthodox Christianity, that Trinity was there. And so I think it's really interesting that you see these, I don't know, these connections, these diversities, but they still got along up until a certain point. So I think there's room for them personally. That's just my thought on it. Um,
Yeah, there's a lot of things to be said about that. I'll just say quickly that the wise men must have been astrologers because they were following a star
mhm,
constellation, and how they could read the stars to know that something extraordinary was happening, and then to find out and to go to where that extraordinary thing happened by navigating through the stars. And then yes, there are huge chunks of Jesus's life that are missing, and a lot of people say that they did flee to Egypt and then India, and the message that he taught. So here's another thing. So you said that Buddhism has been around 500 years before Jesus's birth, right?
that's what you told me, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so that is the timeline. So for 500 years, people had been practicing Buddhism, and through the places where Jesus was born and raised, it was trade routes.
Mm-hmm.
So every day he would have seen Buddhists. He would have seen caravans of Buddhists going to sell salt and other goods. And so Jesus would have, even if he never went to Buddhist countries and studied Buddhism, he would have known some Buddhists as
Mm-hmm.
travelers through that area selling their goods or going to buy goods, right? And so there was no way that Jesus did not come in contact with Buddhism in some
Mm,
way.
in some way.
And his message, talking about the Gospel of Thomas and all that, is not an Old Testament message. It's almost like he's preaching about another God or another religion. It's like if you couldn't think of two more different books than the Old Testament and the New Testament, and just got two random books and stuck them together and put them in the same cover, is very, very, it's like getting War and Peace and then the book about Forrest Gump and putting them together in the same cover.
So yeah. So the whole idea that this is, yeah, the Bible has always intrigued me to the point that when Katie was in Turkey, one of the places that I had to go and physically be there myself was a town that's now called Iznik, which was formerly called Nicaea, which
Mm.
is where the Council of Nicaea gathered to decide what all religious teachings were going to go into this singular book. And the whole thing that they were trying to do was put in a little bit for everybody to create a universal religion, which Catholic is means universal. So to create a universal religion for all of the people, for the point of keeping them in control, for the power over structure, to keep all these people satisfied and not fighting each other for, you know, for power. So
Yeah.
it's really interesting. And it is a little bitty podunk town. But I
It,
had to go. I mean, that was part of my spiritual journey I mean, like that I've been going through um from the time that I was a kid, but I had to be on that land. I had to put my feet there, and I did.
that's,
So,
yeah, everybody was, broken down in little sects, and they were
mhm.
studying different documents, and they were trying to streamline it and give some approved version of the gospel. And so they edited the hell out of the Bible, and they left out a lot of books.
And then I think it's interesting that from Catholicism, came Martin Luther and the Reformation, and like all the the protesters against Catholicism. And the first one out of that was the Lutheran Church, which is a strong, strict church. And all the denominations that then have subsequently come out of that believe something totally different.
Yeah.
But that's where the snowball started. And so you see, if you ever want to take one giant step back and look, man's hand in every major religion of every denomination, every scripture, every, the division of the chapters and the verse, people were involved, and usually men, because it is patriarchal religion that is predominant in this world, that is detrimental to women.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's all religions that I
Mm-hmm.
know of.
Well, it's definitely the pervasive
Yeah.
ones. Yeah. So, and it's interesting. And then like to be able to, and then for me as a feminist, and I say the word feminist in the sense that that means equal. Okay. But I highlight the word feminine because we don't have that equality. We're the ones that have been oppressed. And understanding that Jesus's story is still applicable to me, what that embodies, that love, his exemplification of inclusiveness. And so it's not against who I am as a woman to
Yeah.
recognize that this is still a beautiful story that is under this patriarchal umbrella, so to speak. So
Well, you can't accuse Jesus of being a toxic masculinity.
you cannot. You
you know,
cannot. Yeah. Yeah. All encompassing love.
yeah, and turning the other cheek and talking about forgiveness and patience and
And
loving
revealing
kindness.
himself to women in, as he is reborn, like the first people who get to see him.
Thinking
You
of
know,
others for yourself, and
mm-hmm,
you know, with going, long suffering for other people.
mm-hmm.
That's just right in line with what women do on the daily.
Yeah. And that's the funny thing, though, too, is because we get this back to this divine calling. Because there was a song that we grew up with, which I can't remember if it's in the text, and I don't think it is in biblical text, but
Mm.
there's a hymn that says, in speaking of Jesus, he could have called 10,000 angels when he
Mhm.
was hanging on the cross instead of dying as the sacrificial lamb for our sins. And I said, if that's one thing that I learned to do differently from Jesus, if I'm ever in that situation, I'm calling the 10,000 angels, which leads us into aliens.
Right? Yeah. Mhm.
Imagine the world's surprise when the 10,000 angels, aliens, I just almost, show up. So,
10,000 aliens.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
anyway, but we use language the best we can to describe what we experience. So,
Well, they say the reason that he didn't, you know, call those 10,000 angels because he felt nothing but love for the people that were killing him. Total love.
well, and there's also the idea that he was trying to be that sacrificial lamb of the Old Testament and embody that story before the eyes of the Jewish people
Hmm.
who he identified with because he was a Jewish man. And so he was living out that story of redemption for that specific group of people.
So I love this preacher. I think the name of the movie is Any Given Sunday, maybe, or Come Sunday. Maybe it's called Come Sunday. I think Any Given Sunday is a football movie.
It's a football movie.
Yeah, I think it's called Come Sunday. But there's this preacher, and I don't remember his name, but he was like a mega church. He had a mega church and, tons of donations and followers and all that stuff. And he had this insight that he did believe in the Jesus story, but according to his reading or interpretation of the Bible, is that Jesus died for the sins of the world once and for all. In other words, you didn't even have to even know the Jesus story. You could be living a Buddhist in some temple in Japan. You could be a Hindu. You could be studying Islam. It doesn't matter if you even have seen a Bible. Jesus died for your sins and you're going to heaven. He atoned that, his animal sacrifice and bloodshed and all that stuff. And he, even for the animals, he came down to be that sacrifice once and for all, covering all of our sins for all eternity. And
He
there's
paid
nothing.
he paid our karmic debt.
Exactly. And there's nothing we can do about it or have to do about it. And man, he lost his church. This preacher, they kicked him off the pulpit and they called him a heretic, and he was almost homeless and was shunned by Christianity. All his big preacher friends that said they loved him and all this stuff, they weren't returning his calls. And so he started out all again, started fresh. He started going to these unity churches, these what are they called? Universal Unity.
Yeah.
United.
Actually, yeah, I actually attended a service or two at that in a church in Oak Cliff before
And
the
it's
pandemic started. Yeah, to understand what they talked about.
right. Some Episcopal churches let him go preach there.
Mm.
And so he went all the way back to the beginning and started, and now he's now he's got a following and videos and books and a church, and he's a traveling preacher and all that stuff, but he hasn't turned away from that insight or that revelation that yes, Jesus died for you and there's nothing you can do about it.
Well, and I remember having a conversation with my mom one time in a reading that I did of the text and I have to go back and look at it and everything. So I don't know it and I can't quote it and I don't try to defend it. But I was telling my mom, like right here, Jesus says, you don't even need me to die for your debt. You don't even need, like, you have this connection. And like, yeah, that's about as far as the conversation went. But yeah, so there can be that idea, but there's also the idea of, yeah, he may have paid or like donated his merit, like you talk about at Woke House, and that I've experienced before, which I think is a beautiful concept in that I've learned through Buddhism is to donate your merit, any merit that you have earned above and beyond paying your karmic debt. So your karmic profit, you give away. So the socialism of karma. But yeah, and so that may have been what he was exemplifying, but still it was just to try to communicate, because there's also the whole idea of we create our own hell, we create our own karma, we create our own problems, and that we don't need anything outside of ourselves, or the fact that we are connected to everything outside of ourselves, whichever way you want to look at it. So there's just lots of different ideas about that, and no one, you can say that for sure for you, but you can't communicate your experience to anybody else.
Yeah, one of the things that always stood out for me about the crucifixion is that, and this is something that I never hear being preached, and that is, and when I read it, I immediately knew what they were trying to get at, because I had read a lot of the Old Testament about the Levites. I think they're the Levites, but they were trained priests, and they were all a part of the same family, and only they had the wherewithal to go behind the go into the Holy of Holies, behind these curtains, and do different rituals and stuff, because that's where God was, right? And they even said that they had to tie a rope around them, and somebody outside had to hold this rope, because if they weren't completely cleansed of their sins, they might die, and their body would have to be pulled out by this rope, their dead body. So yeah, that's a whole nother thing about what could have been behind those curtains, right? But it had to be this family and this certain bloodline and this certain titles and anointings to be able to serve as this priesthood. And when Jesus died on the cross, that veil got ripped all the way down, so that the Holy of Holies was exposed to the world. And basically, God was let out of a box. God was let out of prison. And we no longer needed a priesthood to go talk to God for us. Any of us, Buddhist, Methodist, Satanist, you name it. You can go directly into the Holy of Holies and talk to God now because of, Jesus.
And that's something really interesting too, that some of the people that I have found who understood my experiences with the divine that I've had without seeking them, that they've just come to me, have used the terminology, your veil is very thin. And so I think that's really interesting. And so I also want to say, I could talk to you all day, but we need to wrap this up. So if there's anything else that you want to add or whatever, without launching into a new story, we know each other so well.
Yeah. Well, basically, I'll just say that, I also listen to near-death experiences. Like almost every night when I go to bed, I listen to somebody's near-death experience. And I can basically say there's only one thing that really stands out, is that you look back over your life, and the only thing that matters is kindness and love and how you treated other people. Never talked about what religion you were or what church you went to or how much money you gave. The very tiny, minute things that you say and do towards other people are being recorded. And it seems to be that's all that really matters to the source, or God, or whoever, is how we treat each other, whether that's with love or kindness or with hatred.
Well, Kiley, that is a beautiful note to end on. So I would like to thank Kiley Jon Clark for being with me today. And I am Shayne Larango, and this was our divine meeting.